James Brown had always believed that a small town could feel like a big family. His diner sat at the corner of Main Street, a place where everyone knew his name and everyone trusted him. The walls of the diner were painted a soft cream color, with pictures of local events and happy customers. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air every morning. James liked to greet each customer with a smile and a friendly word, and most people returned the warmth. It was a sunny Wednesday morning when the trouble began. James was wiping down the counter, humming a soft tune to himself. The diner was quiet, with only a few regulars sipping coffee and reading newspapers. The bell above the door jingled, and 2 police officers entered. James noticed their serious expressions immediately. They were not the friendly officers he had seen in town before. Something felt different, but he tried to stay calm. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you with something?" James asked politely. The taller officer did not smile. He looked around the diner with a stern expression. "We have some questions, sir," he said. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. James nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "Of course. Please have a seat if you like. I can get you some coffee while we talk." The officer shook his head. "We are not here to sit. We are here to ask about a complaint we received." James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had always followed the law, never caused trouble, and had spent decades serving the community. He wondered what could have happened. "I assure you I have done nothing wrong. Can you tell me what this complaint is about?" The other officer stepped forward abruptly. "We need you to come with us now." James's heart raced. He looked around, seeing the curious and worried faces of his regular customers. A few of them whispered to each other, unsure how to react. James raised his hand slowly. "Please, I will cooperate, but I don't understand." "I have not done anything illegal." The officer ignored him. He grabbed James's arm, pulling him toward the door. James tried to stay calm, but the sudden force made him stumble slightly. "Please, I am only asking for an explanation," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. One of the customers, a young woman named Mia, spoke up. "Sir, maybe you should just listen. They might be confused." James shook his head gently. "I want to stay calm. I will not resist, but I need fairness. I need to be treated with respect." The officers, however, were not listening. Their actions became rougher, and James felt the pain of their harsh grip. The diner had gone silent except for the clinking of cups and the soft hum of the coffee machine. People watched, frozen, unsure how to help without making things worse. James thought of his family, hoping they were safe and that someone knew what was happening. What James did not know was that someone very important was already aware of the situation. Far away, in a secure office filled with computers and monitors, David Brown, his son, was reviewing news updates and security feeds. David worked as a security chief at the White House, trained to handle emergencies calmly and effectively. His heart skipped a beat when he saw his father being treated unfairly on a live video feed. He knew immediately that action was needed. Back in the diner, James struggled to stay calm. He tried to speak gently to the officers, reminding them that the people around were watching and that he had always been respectful. The officers did not respond, focused only on their version of the situation. James felt fear, frustration, and sadness all at once. He wondered how quickly a normal morning could turn into something frightening and unfair. Mia quietly took out her phone and began recording. She wanted to make sure that there was evidence of what was happening. She knew that sometimes seeing the truth could make a difference. James noticed her, and for a brief moment he felt a small flicker of hope. Even in a difficult situation, there were people who cared and were willing to stand quietly for justice. James took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. No matter how unfair the situation seemed, he had to be strong. He could not predict what would happen next, but he knew that patience, courage, and honesty were his only tools. He just hoped that his son, who was trained to handle emergencies and protect people, would somehow know what was happening in time to help. David Brown sat at his desk in the White House security office, his eyes fixed on multiple monitors. He was used to high-pressure situations, but nothing had prepared him for seeing his father in trouble on a small-town diner video. The moment he saw James being grabbed by the officers, a sharp feeling of anger ran through him. Yet David knew that anger alone would not help. He had to act calmly, think carefully, and protect his father without making the situation worse. He picked up his phone and called a trusted agent, Lisa. "Lisa, We have an urgent situation in Middleton. My father is at the diner, and he is being treated unfairly. I need you to verify everything immediately, he said, his voice steady but urgent. Lisa listened carefully. Understood, sir. I will send a local team and check the video feed. We will report back immediately. David stayed on the line, watching every angle from the security cameras and the live feed from Mia's phone, which had already started circulating online. He saw the officer's rough behavior and how calm his father remained despite the pain. James did not yell, did not fight, and continued to speak politely, even while being pushed around. David felt a mix of pride and worry. His father had always been patient, but no one deserved to be treated in this way. Meanwhile, back in the diner, James tried to keep his voice calm. Please, officers, there is no reason for this. I want to cooperate, but I also want respect. My customers are watching, and I hope you understand that fairness matters. The officers ignored his words at first, focused on their own assumptions. One of them was becoming frustrated because the video feed showed more witnesses gathering outside. People in the neighborhood had started noticing what was happening. Some whispered to each other. Others quietly took out their phones. The energy in the diner was tense but not chaotic. James's calm presence kept everyone from panicking. Mia, who had been recording silently, noticed David's team arriving in town. Through her phone, she could see the cars pull up outside. She whispered to James, "Sir, help is coming. Someone important is here to make sure everything is safe." James's eyes widened as he saw men in dark suits moving with purpose. He recognized the discipline in their steps. Even without knowing exactly who they were, he felt hope for the first time that morning. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking a deep breath. Outside, the small security team led by David moved carefully. They stayed in the shadows at first, observing how the officers were treating James. David wanted to avoid confrontation if possible. He knew the officers were outnumbered only by their own authority and the tension in the room. His plan was to step in only when necessary, using his presence and training to de-escalate the situation. Inside the diner, the tension continued to grow. Customers looked worried but stayed calm, respecting James's silent strength. James noticed a little boy holding his mother's hand, watching the scene with wide eyes. He felt a surge of responsibility, not just for himself but for everyone who might be hurt by fear or anger. He reminded himself to stay composed, to speak kindly even when treated unfairly. David's voice finally came over a secure line to one of his agents near the diner. "Make contact with my father carefully. Ensure no one is harmed. Wait for my signal before intervening directly. This situation must end peacefully." As the agent approached James, he whispered reassurance. "Sir, help is here. Please stay calm. My team is outside, and we are going to resolve this safely." James nodded, grateful for the support, and continued to talk calmly to the officers. His words were polite but firm. "I have always respected the law. I ask you to respect me and my customers. We can solve this without anger or force." David watched everything unfold on the monitor. He knew that the next few minutes were critical. His father's life and dignity were at stake, and how the officers reacted now would determine the outcome. David's training guided him as he prepared to step in if necessary. He stayed calm, letting strategy guide action, knowing that courage was not just about strength but about patience and intelligence. Inside the diner, the tension was rising with each passing minute. James Brown stood tall despite the pain in his arm from the officer's rough grip. His calm voice echoed through the room as he tried to reason with them. "Please, we can talk. There is no need for force. I want to cooperate and resolve this peacefully," he said. Customers watched silently, some clutching their cups of coffee tightly, others whispering encouragement to James. The taller officer frowned, clearly frustrated. He did not expect James to stay calm. Most people would have shouted or resisted, but James's patience and steady gaze made the officer uneasy. The other officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the gathering crowd outside the windows. James noticed the tension in their movements and realized that people were beginning to notice the unfairness. Mia, still recording quietly from her corner, felt hope rising. She had seen too many situations escalate unnecessarily, but James's calmness seemed to hold the room together. His words were polite, but they carried weight. "Please, officers, think about what is happening here. This is a place of peace and community. There is no reason for conflict," James said. Outside the diner, the small security team led by David was moving carefully. They stayed hidden for now, observing the officers' actions and making sure no one was harmed. David knew that patience was as important as speed in situations like this. One wrong move could make things worse. His father's dignity was important, and David wanted the situation to end with respect for everyone involved. Back inside, James continued to speak softly, his calm words reaching both officers and customers. I have served this community for years. I have worked hard and treated everyone with respect. I ask for the same respect in return. His eyes met the taller officers, and for a moment the man seemed to hesitate. James could sense that the officer was beginning to feel the weight of what was happening, the eyes of neighbors and witnesses on him. The customers' whispers grew louder outside James's speech. Some neighbors had come closer to see what was happening. They did not shout or make threats, but their presence added a quiet pressure on the officers. James noticed them and smiled gently, grateful for the silent support. Thank you, everyone, he whispered, keeping his voice soft so the officers would hear it calmly, not like a challenge. Suddenly, a quiet knock came at the diner door. One of David's agents, a tall man named Robert, stepped inside cautiously. He was not aggressive, only careful. Sir, my name is Robert. I am here to help. Please stay calm and we will make sure this ends safely, he whispered to James. James nodded slightly, feeling a wave of relief. Thank you. Please help me resolve this peacefully, he said. Robert gave a subtle nod and positioned himself to guide the situation without causing panic. David's instructions were clear. Protect his father, avoid confrontation, and wait for the right moment to act. The taller officer noticed the new presence and stiffened. He whispered something to his partner, who looked equally confused. They were aware that more eyes were watching, and the tension of the crowd outside was adding to their unease. James used this moment to continue speaking calmly. Officers, this is not a moment to act harshly. We can solve this with words, not force. Let us all remain calm. Mia's phone captured every detail, showing both the officers and James's calm demeanor. She could see that the officers were slowly losing their aggressive posture. Unsure how to respond to James's steady voice and the quiet but firm support of the team outside, David watched from a distance, ready to step in if necessary. His father's strength amazed him. James was not only calm, but he was also strategic in his words, appealing to fairness and reason. David knew that patience had become their strongest tool. The situation could end safely if everyone stayed calm, and David prepared for the moment when his presence would finally bring complete resolution. Inside the diner, James continued to talk gently, his voice steady, reminding everyone that fairness and respect mattered more than fear. The officers hesitated, the customers held their breath, and the security team waited. The room was tense, but for the first time there was hope that the day would end without harm. James's courage and calmness had started to change the mood, and David knew it was only a matter of time before the situation would be resolved peacefully. Outside the diner, David Brown's team moved quietly, their presence careful and deliberate. They were trained for high-pressure situations, but this was different. There was no immediate threat, only the tension of a misunderstanding that had escalated too quickly. David remained calm, speaking softly into his headset. Stay close, but do not intervene unless necessary. Watch every movement and be ready to step in only if my father's safety is at risk. Inside the diner, James continued to speak to the officers with a calm voice that seemed to fill the room. I have spent my life helping people. I have never harmed anyone, and I hope you can understand that I only want fairness and respect. Let us handle this situation calmly. His eyes met each officer's, steady and unwavering. It was not fear that shone in his gaze, but confidence and patience. The taller officer shifted uncomfortably. He was not used to people speaking so calmly under pressure. He glanced at the crowd outside the windows and noticed the neighbors standing quietly, observing. No one shouted or acted aggressively, but their presence added weight. Even in their silence, the support for James was clear. The officer hesitated, unsure how to respond. Mia, still holding her phone, recorded every moment. She moved slightly to get a better angle while keeping herself out of the officer's direct view. Her hands were steady as she captured the scene. She knew that this evidence could be important if there were misunderstandings later. She also knew it could show the world that calmness and patience were powerful tools, even in tense situations. Suddenly the door opened quietly, and Robert, the agent David had sent inside earlier, Stepped closer to James, he whispered softly, "Sir, we are here to help. Stay calm and follow my lead. We will ensure this ends peacefully." James nodded slightly, grateful for the reassurance. He took a deep breath and turned back to the officers. "I ask you again to listen. We can resolve this without any further conflict. Please allow me to cooperate and speak with my son's team if necessary." The officers looked at each other, clearly unsure what to do. The presence of Robert and the other agents outside had changed the energy in the room. They were no longer the only ones in control. James's calm confidence and polite but firm words had created a new balance. It was no longer a one-sided situation. David, observing from outside, could see the shift. His father's patience was making a difference. People in the neighborhood were holding their positions quietly, and the officers were now aware that they were being watched. David spoke softly into his headset, giving instructions. "Move closer slowly, but do not act aggressively. Let him know we are here to help, not to confront." Inside the diner, the officers' posture began to change. They were less tense, their movements slower and more careful. James noticed this and continued to speak gently. "We all have responsibilities. You are here to serve and protect. I only ask that you remember your duty and act with fairness and respect." Mia whispered to a customer near her. "Look at him. He is calm but strong. That is what courage looks like." The customer nodded, watching James. His calm voice and composed demeanor were powerful. Even the officers could no longer ignore the truth of his words. They realized that force was not the answer here. David's team, positioned outside, prepared to step in if needed, but for now, the presence alone was enough to influence the situation. Minutes passed slowly, each one filled with tension and quiet observation. James remained calm, his voice steady, his posture firm. He showed that patience and courage could influence even the most difficult circumstances. The officers hesitated, and for the first time, it seemed possible that this situation could end peacefully without anyone being harmed. David finally spoke softly into his headset, a sense of relief in his voice. "We are ready to step in if necessary, but let him continue. His calmness is working. Be prepared, but do not act unless absolutely needed." Inside the diner, James smiled faintly at Mia. He whispered, "Thank you for helping. Your calm presence makes a difference." Mia nodded quietly, her hand still steady on her phone. Together they waited, knowing that patience, courage, and careful observation would guide the next moments to a safe and fair conclusion. Outside the diner, the crowd of neighbors had grown quietly. They did not shout or act aggressively, but their presence made the air heavier with expectation. People held small signs in their hands, not to challenge the officers, but to show support for fairness and respect. Mothers held their children close. Elderly neighbors stood tall, and friends exchanged calm but encouraging glances. Inside, James Brown noticed the subtle shift. The officers were no longer moving quickly or roughly. Their attention had divided between him and the people watching from the windows. James understood that this silent support had power. Even without speaking, the community was standing beside him, reminding everyone that fairness mattered. James turned to Mia, who was still recording. "Thank you," he whispered. "Your calmness and effort are helping more than you know." Mia smiled slightly, feeling proud. She had been afraid at first, but James's patience had inspired her. The two of them represented the calm strength in the room. The taller officer adjusted his stance, looking around nervously. He whispered to his partner, trying to understand what was happening. The presence of the crowd, combined with James's calm but firm demeanor, made him pause. He had not expected to face such quiet resistance and dignity. His partner nodded slowly, realizing that they could not continue with the rough behavior without facing the eyes of the entire neighborhood. At that moment, David's team moved closer to the diner doors, ready to step in if needed. They remained careful and professional, making sure not to escalate the situation. David spoke softly into his headset. "We will wait until the officers are calm. Let the situation de-escalate naturally. Prepare to support my father if needed, but do not rush." Inside, James continued to speak gently, his voice steady and filled with kindness. "We all have important roles," he said to the officers. "You are here to protect the community. I am here to serve it. Let us work together without anger or misunderstanding. We can solve this peacefully." Mia adjusted her phone slightly to capture the changing expressions on the officers' faces. Slowly, the tension began to fade. The officers no longer looked angry. They looked uncertain. James could see the effect of calm words, patience, and the silent support of neighbors. It was working. A young man outside held a small sign that read, "Respect everyone." He looked at James through the window and smiled quietly. James returned the smile, nodding in appreciation. Even simple gestures had power in moments like these. Each person who remained calm and peaceful contributed to the change. The officers shifted their gaze between James and the crowd. The presence of David's agents outside, combined with the growing support inside and outside the diner, had changed the dynamic completely. They realized that they had overreacted. They had acted too quickly and without understanding. Now they faced the truth that fairness and patience were stronger than force. David watched everything from a distance, noticing how his father's calm strength had influenced not only the officers but also the community. He whispered to his team, "This is exactly why we train for patience. Let him continue. Support will follow naturally." James continued to speak softly, appealing to the humanity in everyone. "We are stronger when we respect each other," he said. "We are safer when we listen. Let us end this morning with understanding, not conflict." The officers finally lowered their hands, their expressions softening. The tension that had filled the diner began to lift. Customers exhaled quietly, feeling the relief that had been building slowly. The presence of neighbors, the calm words of James, and the quiet watch of David's team had created an environment where fairness could take its place. Mia lowered her phone briefly, smiling at James. "It is working," she whispered. James nodded, feeling grateful not only for her help, but also for the strength of the people around him. Together they had shown that patience, courage, and unity could create change even in difficult moments. For the first time that morning, James allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The officers had begun to listen, and the community had stood firmly, peacefully. The day had started with tension and fear, but it was moving toward calm and understanding. James knew that the coming moments would show whether courage and patience could truly resolve a situation without conflict. The morning sun cast a soft light over Middleton as David Brown's team approached the diner carefully. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. David himself was in the lead, his eyes calm but focused. He had trained for moments like this, but this was different. This was his father, a man who had always stood for kindness and fairness, and now he needed protection. Inside the diner, James Brown continued to speak to the officers with calm determination. "I have always tried to do what is right," he said. "I ask that you remember your duty and treat everyone here with respect. We can resolve this peacefully." The officers' stance had softened over the last few minutes, but there was still tension. They glanced nervously at the growing crowd outside, and at the calm figure of Robert, the agent who had been standing nearby. It was clear that the officers understood the gravity of the situation. Their harshness had begun to fade, replaced by uncertainty and awareness of the community watching. Suddenly the door opened quietly, and David stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not shout. He walked with a calm authority that immediately changed the energy in the room. His eyes met his father's, and James felt a surge of relief and pride. Seeing David here, calm but firm, gave him confidence that everything would soon be resolved. David spoke softly, addressing the officers first. "Good morning. I am here to help. My father is not a threat, and we want to resolve this peacefully." His voice carried authority but also calmness. It was not demanding, but it commanded attention. The taller officer stepped back slightly, recognizing David immediately. His partner also stiffened. They knew the position David held and understood that any further roughness would have serious consequences. For the first time, they truly saw the respect and patience James had shown throughout the morning. James smiled faintly at David. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I have stayed calm, but it has been difficult." David nodded. "I saw everything," he said. "You did exactly what you needed to do. Now we will make sure this ends safely and fairly." The officers looked between David and James, understanding that the situation had shifted completely. They were no longer the only authority in the room. David's calm presence, combined with his team outside and the silent support of the neighbors, created a new balance. Force was no longer an option. Reason and fairness now guided the moment. David motioned subtly to his agents outside, who began to move closer, still careful and professional. Their presence reassured the customers and the neighbors without causing alarm. Everyone felt that the situation would be resolved safely. James's patience had created a space for calm, and now David's presence would guide it to a peaceful conclusion. He turned to his father and whispered quietly, "Stay calm, Dad, we are handling it." James nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He continued to speak to the officers, his voice steady. "We all have responsibilities. You are here to protect, I am here to serve. Let us work together with fairness and respect." The officers finally lowered their hands completely, the tension leaving their shoulders. Their expressions softened as they realized the impact of James's calm words and the surrounding support. They nodded slowly, acknowledging that they had overreacted, and that the right thing to do now was to resolve the situation peacefully. Mia, who had been recording carefully, lowered her phone slightly, smiling. She whispered to James, "It is almost over. Your patience has made a difference." James smiled at her, grateful for her quiet support. Every small act of calm had contributed to the peaceful shift. David addressed the room gently. "We are here to ensure safety and fairness. This morning has been tense, but now we can all move forward calmly. No one needs to be afraid. Respect and patience have guided us this far, and they will carry us to the end." James looked around the diner, at the customers, the neighbors outside, and the officers who were now calm. He felt proud and grateful. The morning had been difficult, but it had shown him the power of patience, courage, and calm words. The tension that had filled the diner at the start of the morning had faded completely. What remained was a quiet understanding that fairness and respect were stronger than force. James and David stood together, a father and son united in calm strength, ready to bring the situation to a peaceful close. The diner was quiet now, but the tension of the morning still lingered in the air. James Brown stood next to his son, David, feeling the relief that had been missing since the officers first entered. The calm words he had spoken, the patience he had maintained, and the silent support of the community had created a powerful effect. The officers now understood that they had overreacted, and the shift in energy in the room was unmistakable. David looked at his father with pride. "You stayed calm and handled everything perfectly," he said softly. "Your patience made a difference for everyone here." James nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and pride. He had never imagined that a normal morning at his diner could turn into such a tense situation, but he had faced it with courage. The taller officer cleared his throat and spoke carefully. "Sir, we understand that we acted too quickly. It was wrong of us to use force before fully understanding the situation. We apologize." His voice was hesitant but sincere. The other officer nodded in agreement. "We should have listened and spoken calmly instead of acting so harshly. We are sorry for our behavior." James kept his voice calm and gentle. "I accept your apology," he said. "I know mistakes happen, and I hope we can all learn from this. Respect and understanding should guide our actions in the future." His words had a power that went beyond anger or fear. They encouraged fairness and humility, and everyone in the room felt the weight of their truth. Outside, the neighbors who had gathered were watching quietly. They could see the officers acknowledging their mistakes and James remaining patient. The community had hoped for a peaceful resolution, and now they felt relief and pride. Mothers smiled, children whispered to their parents, and neighbors nodded to each other with quiet approval. Mia, who had been recording throughout the morning, lowered her phone and whispered to James, "You did it. You stayed calm, and now everything is ending peacefully." James smiled at her, grateful for her presence and for the careful recording that had captured the truth. "Thank you," he whispered back. "Your support made a difference as well." David spoke to the officers again, his voice firm but not harsh. "It is important to remember your responsibility to serve the community with fairness and respect. Today was a test of patience, and I hope it serves as a reminder of how important it is to remain calm in difficult situations." The officers nodded. They now understood that true strength was not in force but in listening, observing and acting with thought and respect. They took a deep breath, acknowledging the lessons they had learned that morning. James turned to the customers who had stayed quietly, watching and supporting him. "Thank you all for remaining calm," he said. "Your patience and understanding helped more than you realize. Today we have shown that courage and calm words can prevent harm and guide people to fairness." The crowd outside responded with quiet nods and smiles. They had been witnesses to a lesson in patience, strength, and understanding. The town would remember this morning not for the conflict but for how it had been resolved peacefully. David put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Your actions have reminded everyone here what courage truly is," he said. "It is not about force or anger. It is about staying calm, speaking with respect, and standing for fairness. You have shown that clearly today." James nodded, feeling the warmth of pride and relief. "We all have roles to play," he said softly. "I did my part. The community did theirs, and now we can all move forward together." The officers stepped back completely, showing that they accepted the lesson and the resolution. The tension in the diner was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding and hope. What had begun as a frightening morning had ended with respect, patience, and unity. As the crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors exchanged smiles and words of encouragement. The town had witnessed an example of courage and fairness that would not be forgotten. James and David stood together, father and son, proud of the peaceful resolution and the lesson that patience, calmness, and understanding could change even the most difficult moments. The morning sun had climbed higher, filling the small town of Middleton with a warm golden light. Inside the diner, James Brown and his son David finally had a moment to breathe. The tension of the morning had faded, leaving behind a quiet sense of relief and hope. Customers returned to their seats, sipping coffee and exchanging calm smiles. Outside, neighbors were beginning to leave, their presence still lingering in the form of quiet support and encouragement. James looked at David and smiled, a mix of pride and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I could feel that help was on the way, but seeing you here makes everything real." David nodded, his eyes warm. "I always come when family needs me," he said. "You stayed strong and calm. That made all the difference today. You taught everyone here the power of patience and fairness." James reflected on the morning's events. What had started as a routine day at the diner had turned into a test of courage, patience, and calmness. He had faced fear, confusion, and unfair treatment, yet he had maintained his composure. Now, standing beside his son and seeing the community's support, he understood how important it was to remain steady in difficult situations. Mia, still standing quietly with her phone, smiled at James. "Your calmness inspired everyone, Mr. Brown," she said. "Even the officers listened because of the way you handled everything." James reached out and patted her shoulder gently. "Thank you, Mia. You helped too. Your quiet support and recording ensured that the truth was seen." The officers, who had once been rough and tense, now stood near the door, their expressions sincere. They had learned an important lesson about patience, fairness, and understanding. The taller officer stepped forward. "Sir, I want to sincerely apologize again for my actions," he said. "I will remember today and strive to act better in the future." His partner nodded, echoing the apology. James smiled gently. "I accept your apology. Today has been a lesson for all of us, and I hope it guides us toward fairness in every situation." David spoke to the officers calmly, his voice filled with quiet authority. "Remember that service is about protection, respect, and understanding. Today showed that calm words and careful observation are stronger than force. Keep that in mind as you continue your work." The officers nodded again, clearly taking the words to heart. Outside, the neighbors had begun to leave, but the energy of support remained. Mothers whispered to their children about the importance of kindness, patience, and courage. Friends exchanged smiles, reflecting on how a tense morning had ended in peace. The town had witnessed a real example of bravery, not in loud actions or anger, but in calm strength and fairness. James turned to David, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I am proud of you," he said softly, "not just because you helped me today, but because you showed wisdom, patience, and respect. You handled everything without anger, and that is true courage." David smiled, feeling the weight of the morning's events lift slightly. "You taught me first, Dad," he said. "You stayed calm, spoke fairly, and showed courage in the face of unfairness. That gave me the confidence to act wisely and protect you without creating more conflict." James looked around the diner at the familiar walls, the smiling customers, and the quiet streets outside. He felt a deep sense of connection, to his son, to his community, and to the principles that guided him. This morning had been a challenge, but it had also been a reminder of the strength found in calmness, patience, and courage. David placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "We did it together," he said. You, the community, and our team all made sure that fairness won today. This morning will be remembered for the right reasons." James nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He smiled at Mia and the other customers, and even at the officers who had learned a valuable lesson. The day had started with fear, tension, and uncertainty, but it ended with understanding, unity, and respect. As the diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, James and David shared a quiet moment, father and son, bound not only by family but by courage, calmness, and respect. The small town of Middleton had witnessed a lesson in humanity, a reminder that patience, understanding, and fairness could overcome fear, conflict, and misunderstanding. The morning had begun with uncertainty, but it ended with hope, strength, and a community that had come together to see the power of calm courage. James and David knew that this day would remain in their hearts forever, a symbol of how patience, respect, and quiet bravery could change lives for the better.